When the doctor told me I was pregnant at 62, I laughed. But I wasn't joking. I was sitting right there on that crinkly paper in the exam room, my ankles crossed like a proper Southern lady, when Dr. Mitchell looked at me over his glasses and said those words that changed everything. My first thought, Lord have mercy, this man's gone senile before I have. But the test don't lie. And just like that, my quiet little life in Whisper Creek, Alabama, population 3,427 and shrinking, turned itself upside down faster than sweet tea in August. I'm Martha Lee Jenkins, by the way. Most folks around here just call me Miss Martha. At least they used to. Nowadays, they call me all sorts of things, mostly behind my back. I've lived in this same white clapboard house on Magnolia Street for 43 years. Raised 3 children here after my Harold passed. Worked 32 years serving lunch at Whisper Creek Elementary before retiring. I've got 7 grandkids, a garden full of tomatoes that win ribbons at the county fair, and until recently, the respect of just about everyone in this town. My days had a certain rhythm to them, you know? Wake up with the sun, coffee on the porch swing, listening to the mockingbirds, maybe some gardening if my arthritis wasn't acting up too bad. Lunch with the ladies from church on Wednesdays, bingo at the VFW Hall every other Friday. Sundays in the 3rd pew from the front at First Baptist, same spot I've sat since 1978. Nothing special, but it was mine. It was enough. That's the funny thing about life, though. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, just when you've made peace with your quiet little corner of the world, something comes along and shakes you like a rag doll. Or someone. In my case, his name was Raymond. Raymond wasn't from around here. You could tell by the way he talked. Not quite Southern, but not Northern either. Gulf Coast, he said. He rolled through town in that beat-up blue pickup truck, selling the freshest fish you ever did taste. First time I saw him was at Mabel Johnson's place next door. I was deadheading my petunias when he knocked on her door, cooler in hand. Tall man, maybe 6 foot or so, with salt and pepper hair even though he couldn't have been much over 40. He had these eyes that looked like they'd seen things, sad things maybe, but they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I didn't think much of it then. Just another traveler passing through our little town. Lord knows we don't get many of those. But the next day, there he was, knocking on my door. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his faded Braves cap, "heard you might be interested in some fresh-caught snapper." I wasn't. Not really. But there was something in his voice that made me invite him up onto the porch for a glass of sweet tea. Said his name was Raymond Collins. Said he traveled up and down the Gulf, selling his catch to folks in towns the big delivery trucks don't bother with anymore. We talked for nearly an hour that day. About nothing and everything. About how my zinnias were coming in. About how he learned to fish from his daddy. About how the world's changing so fast it makes your head spin sometimes. When he left, I found myself watching his truck disappear down the street, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Pretty soon, Raymond was stopping by every few days, sometimes with fish, sometimes just to sit a spell. We'd drink tea on the porch and watch the fireflies come out as the sun went down. He'd tell me stories about the towns he visited, the people he met. I'd tell him about my grandkids, my garden, the latest town gossip. It was nice, comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. I never planned on inviting him inside. Never planned on him staying for dinner. Never planned on him touching my hand across the table, his fingers rough from years of fishing nets and salt water. I certainly never planned on him kissing me in my kitchen, the dishes half done in the sink. I'm not some silly teenager. I'm a grandmother, for heaven's sake, a respected member of this community. But there's something about being truly seen after years of invisibility that breaks down every wall you've ever built. Raymond looked at me, really looked at me, not as some old widow woman, not as someone's mama or grandmama, but as Martha, just Martha, a woman with thoughts and feelings and, yes, desires that didn't die when my hair turned gray and my skin started to sag. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. That first night he stayed, we didn't even say much, just held each other in my bed, the same bed I'd shared with Harold for 30 years. I should have felt guilty, I suppose. But all I felt was alive, truly, completely alive for the first time in decades. We moved slow, gentle-like, no rushing, no fumbling, just two lonely souls finding comfort in each other's arms. He left the next morning, said he had deliveries to make in the next county, promised he'd be back in a week or so. Kissed me goodbye right there on my front porch in broad daylight, not caring who might see. I watched his truck until it disappeared around the bend, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I never thought about consequences, never thought about what might happen. Why would I? I was 62 years old, for crying out loud. My childbearing days were long gone, or so I thought. The hot flashes, the night sweats, all that mess had stopped years ago. My body had moved on to the next chapter, the quiet chapter, the winding down chapter. But life, it seems, had other plans for me. Plans that would test every ounce of strength I had. Plans that would show me just how cruel people can be when you don't fit into their neat little boxes. Plans that would teach me more about myself than I ever wanted to know. The weeks after Raymond left were some of the sweetest I'd had in years. I found myself humming while I watered my garden, something I hadn't done since Harold was alive. I'd catch my reflection in the hall mirror and actually stop to look for a change. Maybe run a hand through my silver hair, wonder if I should try a new style. Mabel next door noticed right away, said I had a certain glow about me. I just laughed it off, told her it must be my new face cream from the Walmart over in Millport. But inside, I felt like a different woman. Like someone had taken the dusty old music box of my heart and wound it up again after years of silence. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen, remembering how Raymond's hands felt on my waist, and I'd have to fan myself with a church bulletin. Mercy, it was like being 16 again, only without all the insecurity and foolishness. At 62, you know who you are. You don't waste time with games or worry what everyone else might think. At least, that's what I thought back then, before everything changed. Raymond called me from a payphone in Tuscaloosa about a week after he left. Just to check in, he said. His voice on the line made my stomach flip like I'd just gone over a hill too fast in my old Buick. We didn't talk long, just enough for him to tell me he'd be back through Whisper Creek the following Thursday. Just enough for me to tell him I'd have a fresh peach cobbler waiting. Just enough for him to say, "I miss you, Martha," in that low voice of his that made my toes curl inside my house slippers. When Thursday came around, I spent the whole morning cleaning. Changed the sheets, dusted every surface, even got down on these old knees to scrub the bathroom floor. Made that peach cobbler from scratch using the last of my frozen peaches from last summer's harvest. Put on my good blue dress, the one with the little white flowers that Harold always liked. Even dabbed on a bit of the Elizabeth Taylor perfume my daughter Lynette had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, still sitting mostly full on my dresser. Raymond showed up just after supper time, his truck loaded down with coolers of fish. He'd had a good catch, he said. The look in his eyes when he saw me standing on the porch waiting for him. Well, it was worth all the cleaning and fussing. He didn't even bring the fish inside, just left them in the truck and followed me into the house like a man in a trance. We ate cobbler on the porch swing first, watching the fireflies come out. He told me about the people he'd met that week, the little Gulf towns he'd visited. I told him about Judith Miller's grandson getting arrested for shoplifting over at the Dollar General, and how Pastor Dave's sermon last Sunday went 15 minutes over because he kept losing his place. Normal, everyday things. But there was nothing normal about how it felt sitting there beside him, our shoulders touching, his laugh warming me more than the humid June air. That night, he stayed again, and this time there was no hesitation between us. No awkward moments. Just a man and a woman finding something in each other that the world thinks we're too old to need anymore. Comfort, yes. Companionship, sure. But passion, too. The kind they never show older folks having in those TV shows my grandkids watch. The kind that made me forget every creak in my joints, every line on my face, every year that separated me from the young woman I used to be. In the morning, over coffee and biscuits, Raymond told me he'd be back in town in about 10 days. Said he had to go further north, maybe up to Tennessee for a while. His sister was having some health troubles, he explained. Needed to check on her. I told him I understood. Tried not to show my disappointment. He took my hand across the kitchen table, my working hand, with its gardener's calluses and arthritis knuckles, and kissed it like I was some kind of queen. "You're something special, Martha Lee," he said, those sad, happy eyes of his looking right into mine. "Don't you forget that." After he left, the house felt emptier somehow, bigger and quieter, like it used to feel right after Harold died. I went about my usual routines: garden club on Monday, hair appointment on Tuesday, church committee meeting on Wednesday. But my mind kept drifting back to Raymond, to his stories, to his gentle hands, to the way he looked at me like he could see past all the years and roles and expectations, right down to the woman underneath. It was at my regular bridge game with the ladies that first Saturday without him that I started feeling strange, lightheaded, almost dizzy. Thought maybe it was just the heat. It was pushing 95 degrees, and Elaine Peterson's air conditioner was making that funny rattling sound it always does when it can't keep up. But then my stomach started feeling queasy too, right in the middle of bidding 3 spades. Had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of Elaine's pink tub, fanning myself with a hand towel and trying not to throw up on her matching bath mat. "You all right in there, Martha?" Elaine called through the door after a few minutes. "Girls are wondering if we should deal you out for this hand." "I'm fine," I called back, though I wasn't sure that was true. Must have been something I ate. I made it through the rest of the afternoon somehow, but the feeling followed me home. Sunday morning, I woke up and couldn't even look at my usual breakfast of buttered toast and strawberry jam. The smell of the coffee I'd set to brew the night before hit me like a punch to the gut, sending me rushing to the bathroom. What in the world was happening, I wondered, as I knelt on the cold tile floor, my nightgown bunched around my knees. Some kind of stomach bug? Food poisoning from the chicken salad at Bridge Club? I called Lynette that afternoon when I still wasn't feeling any better. My daughter's a nurse over at the hospital in Tuscaloosa, has been for going on 20 years now. Always my first call when anything medical comes up. "Probably just a virus going around, Mama," she said. "Lots of summer bugs this year. Drink plenty of fluids, stick to crackers and plain toast for a day or two. If you're not better by Tuesday, I'll come take you to see Dr. Mitchell." But by Tuesday, I wasn't better. If anything, I was worse. The nausea would come in waves, especially in the morning. Certain smells would set it off: coffee, the roses Raymond had brought me that were now wilting on my kitchen table, even my own perfume. And I was so tired. Bone-deep tired, like I used to feel when the kids were little and up all night with ear infections or bad dreams. Lynette drove over that afternoon, took one look at me, and insisted on taking me straight to the clinic. "You're pale as a sheet, Mama," she said, her nurse's eyes assessing me. "And you've lost weight. Something's not right." I didn't argue. Truth be told, I was starting to worry myself. At my age, you don't take chances with your health. Every ache and pain could be something serious. Every dizzy spell could be the start of something worse. And in the back of my mind, there was this little whisper, this impossible thought that I kept pushing away. "No," I told myself. "It couldn't be that. Not at my age. Not now." But as Dr. Mitchell asked me to describe my symptoms while Lynette sat in the plastic chair beside the exam table, that little whisper got louder and louder until I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Martha, when was your last menstrual cycle?" Dr. Mitchell asked, looking up from his clipboard. I felt my cheeks flush hot as a Georgia highway in July. Lynette was sitting right there, for heaven's sake. Some things a mother just doesn't discuss in front of her children, no matter how old they are or what kind of medical training they've got. "Oh, years ago, doctor," I said, waving my hand dismissively. I went through all that change-of-life business back when Bill Clinton was still in office. He nodded, making another note. And you've been sexually active recently? Lord, if I thought my face was hot before. I couldn't even look at Lynette, whose sharp intake of breath I heard clear as day from that plastic chair. I don't see what that has to do with anything, I said primly, smoothing my skirt over my knees. Mama. Lynette's voice was high and tight. Answer the question, please. I stared at the diplomas on Dr. Mitchell's wall, anywhere but at my daughter's face. Yes, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't see how that could be relevant to my symptoms. I'm 62 years old. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. While rare, Martha, it's not impossible. I'd like to run a simple test to rule it out before we look at other possibilities. The next 20 minutes in that exam room were about the most uncomfortable of my entire life. Lynette, bless her heart, didn't say a word while we waited for the nurse to bring in the test results, but I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. The clock on the wall ticked so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. I counted the ceiling tiles twice, practiced the names of all my grandkids in order of age, anything to distract myself from what was coming. When Dr. Mitchell walked back in with that little strip of paper in his hand, I knew. I knew before he opened his mouth, before he said those impossible words. Martha, you're pregnant. The drive home with Lynette was silent as a tomb. She gripped the steering wheel of her Honda so tight her knuckles were white, staring straight ahead at the road like it might disappear if she blinked. I sat with my purse clutched in my lap, watching the familiar scenery of my hometown blur past the window. Whisper Creek had never felt so small, so suffocating. Were you going to tell me? Lynette finally asked as we turned onto Magnolia Street. Her voice was controlled, the way it gets when she's real upset, but trying not to show it. Tell you what, exactly, I said, though I knew perfectly well what she meant. That you've been involved with someone. She practically choked on the words. Who is he, Mama? Do I know him? I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years. His name is Raymond. He's a fisherman from down on the Gulf. Comes through town selling his catch every couple weeks. A fisherman. Lynette's voice was flat. How old is this fisherman? I hesitated, knowing how this was going to sound. 39. The car jerked as Lynette's foot slipped on the brake. 39? Good Lord, Mama, he's closer to my age than yours. What were you thinking? What was I thinking? That's the question, isn't it? Truth is, I wasn't thinking. Not about consequences or what people might say or whether it made any kind of sense. I was feeling alive and seen and wanted for the first time since your daddy passed. But how do you explain that to your grown daughter? How do you make her understand that age is just a number and loneliness is a whole lot bigger than any number could ever be? I was thinking that I'm still a woman, Lynette, I said quietly as we pulled into my driveway. Not just your mama or somebody's grandma, a woman with a heart that still works just fine. She turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. Just sat there staring at my little white house with its porch swing and flower boxes. Does he know? She finally asked. About the baby? The words seemed to stick in her throat. No, I said, looking down at my hands, weathered hands, a grandmother's hands. He's been gone about 2 weeks. Said he'd be back in a few days. Lynette's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. And you believe that? Mama, come on. A younger man, traveling through town, no fixed address? He's probably halfway to California by now. Her words stung worse than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, a part of me had been thinking the same thing. That maybe Raymond had gotten what he wanted and moved on. That maybe I'd been a fool to believe any of it was real. But another part of me, the part that remembered the way he looked at me across my kitchen table, the tenderness in his hands, the promises whispered in the dark. That part wasn't ready to give up on him yet. He'll be back, I said, with more conviction than I felt. Raymond's a good man. Well, he better be, Lynette said, finally turning to look at me. There were tears in her eyes now. Because this situation it's just, Mama, what are you going to do? What was I going to do? The question echoed in my head long after Lynette had left, after extracting a promise from me to call Dr. Harris, the OB-GYN over in Tuscaloosa, first thing in the morning. What was I going to do about a pregnancy at 62? About a baby who'd be graduating high school when I was 80? About a town that would surely start talking the minute word got out? About Raymond, who didn't even know yet that he was going to be a father again at 39? I sat on my porch swing that evening, watching the sun set behind Mrs. Granger's big oak tree across the street. The same swing where Raymond and I had sat sharing peach cobbler and stories just 2 weeks ago. The same porch where I'd waved goodbye to him, never imagining what was already beginning inside me. My hand drifted to my stomach, still flat, still just the softness of age, no sign yet of the miracle or madness growing within. A baby. My baby. At 62 years old. The thought was so ridiculous I almost laughed out loud. Martha Lee Jenkins, grandmother of 7, retired lunch lady, respected church elder, pregnant out of wedlock with a man 23 years her junior. If it wasn't happening to me, I'd think it was one of those trashy stories on the supermarket magazines. But it was happening to me. The nausea, the fatigue, the missed periods I'd attributed to age. It all made sense now. And despite the fear, despite the absolute insanity of it all, there was a tiny flicker of something else in my heart, something that felt dangerously like joy. I thought about Harold then, about how he'd wanted a big family, but complications after Lynette meant we'd stopped at 3. About how he'd doted on every grandbaby that came along, teaching them to fish in the creek that gave our town its name, slipping them candy when he thought I wasn't looking. What would he think of all this? Of me now? Would he be ashamed? Disappointed? Or would he understand that hearts don't stop needing just because they've been broken? The phone rang inside, startling me out of my thoughts. I hurried to answer it, heart pounding with the irrational hope that it might be Raymond. But it was only Mabel from next door, wanting to know if I'd heard about Shirley Thompson's daughter getting divorced again. Actually, Mabel, I'm not feeling too well tonight, I said, cutting her off mid-gossip. Think I might turn in early. Still got that stomach bug, huh? Mabel clucked sympathetically. Judith Miller had something similar last month. Turned out to be her gallbladder. You really should get that checked, Martha. I did, I said, suddenly exhausted by the effort of normal conversation when nothing about my life felt normal anymore. Doctor says I'll be just fine. Just fine. The words echoed hollowly after I hung up. Would I be fine? Would any of this be fine? I thought about calling my other children, David down in Mobile, Sarah out in Arizona, but what would I say? How do you tell your grown children something like this over the phone? As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same silver hair I'd had for years now. Same laugh lines around my eyes and mouth. Same Martha Lee Jenkins I'd always been. Except not the same at all. Everything had changed, even if it didn't show on the outside yet. Well, I told my reflection, looks like you've gone and gotten yourself into quite the situation this time. And for the first time since Dr. Mitchell had delivered his bombshell news, I let myself really feel it all. The fear, the shock, the uncertainty. And yes, that dangerous little flicker of joy, too. I placed both hands on my stomach and whispered to the impossible life beginning there. I don't know what's going to happen, little one, but we're going to figure it out together. 3 days after the doctor's news, Raymond still hadn't called or shown up. Each morning, I'd wake with my heart in my throat, rushing to the bathroom first thing. The nausea was getting worse, not better. Dr. Harris in Tuscaloosa had squeezed me in for an appointment the following week, but until then, I was on my own with this secret that felt too big for my little house to contain. Lynette called twice a day, checking in. I could hear the worry in her voice, the unasked questions. She'd promised not to tell her siblings yet, giving me time to figure things out, as she put it. What that meant exactly, neither of us said out loud. But I knew what she was thinking, what most people would think. A woman my age has options, responsibilities, practical considerations. But every time my hand drifted to my stomach, every time I thought about the little spark of life growing there against all odds, I knew what my heart was telling me. This baby might not make any kind of sense, but it was mine. A miracle or madness. Maybe both. But mine all the same. It was Wednesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Bridge Club Day, which I'd called to cancel, claiming that stomach bug was still lingering. I was in my housecoat, despite it being nearly 2 o'clock, sipping ginger tea and trying to keep down some saltines. The last thing I wanted was company, but there it was. That insistent chime that meant someone was standing on my porch, expecting to be welcomed in. I tightened the belt of my robe, smoothed my hair, and shuffled to the door, prepared to send whoever it was on their way with a polite excuse. But when I pulled it open, the words died in my throat. Because there he was, Raymond, looking just the same as when he'd left. Maybe a little more tanned from the sun, a little more tired around the eyes, but solid and real, and standing right there on my welcome mat. "Martha," he said, his voice wrapping around my name like a warm blanket. "I'm sorry I'm late getting back. My sister's condition was worse than we thought, and then the truck broke down outside of Nashville and—" I didn't let him finish. Just stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him, breathing in his scent of sunshine and pine soap and something distinctly Raymond. He seemed startled for a moment. Then his arms came around me, holding me close right there on my front porch where anyone driving by could see. I didn't care. For the first time in days, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened just a fraction. "You're here now," I said into his shirt. "That's what matters." He pulled back to look at me, concern creasing his brow. "You feeling okay, Martha? You look a little pale." Oh, Lord, here it was. The moment I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. I took his hand and led him inside, away from curious eyes. In my living room, surrounded by photographs of my children and grandchildren, my life on display in picture frames and knickknacks, I turned to face him. "Raymond, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it except straight out." I took a deep breath, feeling dizzy all over again. "I'm pregnant. I've said a lot of unexpected things in my 62 years, told my share of shocking news, but I've never seen anyone's face go through as many expressions as Raymond's did in those few seconds. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, wonder, fear, all chasing each other across his features like clouds on a windy day. "Pregnant?" he repeated, sinking down onto my floral couch like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. But you're 62. I know." I sat beside him, not quite touching. "Believe me, I know how impossible it sounds. Dr. Mitchell ran the test twice." Raymond stared at the braided rug beneath his feet, his hands dangling between his knees. I couldn't read his face anymore, couldn't tell what he was thinking. The silence stretched between us, taking up all the oxygen in the room. "Say something," I finally whispered. "Please." He looked up then, those sad, happy eyes meeting mine. "A baby," he said softly. "Our baby." Something in my chest uncoiled at the word our. Not just mine. Ours. I nodded, tears threatening for the first time since this whole thing began. "I never thought—" Raymond shook his head, a small, wondering smile starting to form. At my age, I figured that ship had sailed. Never had kids of my own. Sometimes regretted it, but mostly made my peace with it. He reached out, hesitantly placing his hand on my knee. "How are you feeling? I mean, physically?" "Sick as a dog most mornings," I admitted. "Tired all the time. But Dr. Harris, that's the specialist in Tuscaloosa, says that's all normal. I see her next week for a proper examination." Raymond nodded, his thumb making small circles on my knee. I want to be there, he said firmly. For the appointment. For all of it. Relief washed over me, so strong it made me lightheaded. You do? Of course I do, he said, looking almost offended. Martha Lee, what kind of man do you take me for? You think I'd just— What? Run off and leave you to handle this alone? The tears spilled over then, all the fear and uncertainty of the past few days coming out in a rush. I didn't know, I sobbed. You were gone so long, and Lynette said— She thought. Raymond moved closer, pulling me against his chest. Shh, he murmured into my hair. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. We sat like that for a long while, me crying into his shirt, him holding me steady like an anchor in a storm. When I finally calmed down, hiccuping a little and surely looking a fright with my red eyes and tear-stained face, he smiled down at me. So, he said, tell me everything the doctor said. We talked for hours, moving from the couch to the kitchen table, where I managed to eat a proper meal for the first time in days with Raymond across from me. He asked all the right questions, made all the right noises of concern, held my hand when I admitted how scared I was, not just of the pregnancy itself, though at my age the risks were significant, but of what people would say, how my children would react, what it would mean for both our lives. People will talk, I said, pushing the last bite of chicken around my plate. In a town this size, there's no hiding something like this. Raymond shrugged. Let them talk. Doesn't change what's real between us. What was real between us? I wasn't even sure myself. We hadn't put labels on anything, hadn't made promises or plans beyond his next visit. And now, here we were, facing a future neither of us could have imagined. And if your feeling is handled with care, drop a comment and let me know if you've ever felt like your emotions were pushed aside. I'll read every single one. Because sometimes just knowing someone else understands can be the first step to healing. What are we doing, Raymond? I asked quietly. What is this thing between us? He reached across the table, taking both my hands in his. This thing between us, Martha Lee, is the most real thing I've felt in a long, long time. I don't have fancy words for it. Don't know if it fits in any particular box, but I know it matters. You matter. His eyes held mine, steady and sure. And that baby matters too. As night fell, Raymond helped me clean up the kitchen, moving around my space like he belonged there. It felt right, having him there, natural in a way I hadn't expected. When it came time for bed, there was no awkwardness, no question. He followed me to my room, our room for tonight at least, and held me close beneath the quilt my mama had made for my wedding day all those years ago. I'll be here when you wake up, he whispered against my temple. Promise. And for the first time since that day in Dr. Mitchell's office, I slept through the night, dreamless and deep. True to his word, Raymond was still there in the morning, making me dry toast and weak tea before the nausea could take hold. Sitting across from him at my kitchen table, watching the early light catch in his salt and pepper hair, I felt something settle in my chest, a certainty clear and bright as the morning sun. Whatever came next, the doctor's appointments, telling my other children, facing the town gossip, we'd face it together. If you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. And facing it all together started sooner than I expected. The doorbell rang just after 9, and there stood Lynette on my porch, her nurse's bag in one hand and determination written all over her face. Mama, I brought you some prenatal vitamins and— She stopped dead when she saw Raymond standing behind me in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You must be the fisherman. The silence in my little front hallway was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lynette stood frozen on the welcome mat, her eyes darting between me and Raymond like she was watching a tennis match. Raymond, to his credit, set down his coffee mug and stepped forward, hand outstretched. Raymond Collins, ma'am, he said, his voice steady and respectful. You must be Lynette. Martha's told me a lot about you. Lynette ignored his hand, clutching her nurse's bag tighter. Funny, she hasn't mentioned a word about you until 3 days ago. Her voice had that sharp edge to it, the one she gets when she's trying to protect me from something, usually myself. Lynette, I said, a warning in my tone. Raymond just got back in town. We've been talking things through. My daughter's eyes softened a fraction when they landed on me, taking in my pale face and tired eyes. I brought those vitamins I mentioned, and some ginger drops for the nausea, the ones I used when I was carrying Emma. Thank you, honey, I said, stepping back to let her in. That's real thoughtful. Watching my daughter and Raymond size each other up in my living room was about as comfortable as sitting on a cactus. Lynette perched on the edge of my armchair like she might need to make a quick getaway, while Raymond settled back on the couch, trying to look more at ease than he probably felt. So, Lynette said after a painful minute of silence, you're a fisherman. Raymond nodded. Yes, ma'am. Mostly Gulf Coast. Snapper, grouper, whatever's running good. Been at it since I was 14, working my daddy's boat. And you travel around selling your catch? That's right. Small towns mostly, places the big suppliers don't bother with. Folks appreciate fresh fish, especially inland. Lynette's eyebrow arched. Must be nice, always being on the move. No roots, no responsibilities. I saw Raymond's jaw tighten slightly, but his voice stayed even. It has its moments, but it gets lonely too. Never staying in one place long enough to really know people. Until my mother, Lynette said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Raymond met her gaze directly. Until your mother, he agreed. Martha's special. I felt my cheeks warm at that, even as Lynette's expression remained skeptical. She turned to me, deliberately excluding Raymond from the conversation. I talked to Dr. Harris this morning. She can see you Friday instead of next week. I'll drive you. That's real kind, but Raymond's already offered to take me, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the tension crackling between them. Lynette's lips pressed into a thin line. Mama, this is serious. You're a high-risk pregnancy by any medical definition. You need proper prenatal care, regular monitoring. And I'll make sure she gets all of that, Raymond cut in, his voice gentle but firm. I understand your concerns, Ms. Lynette. I've got plenty of my own, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for your mother, for this baby, for whatever comes next. Lynette studied him, her nurse's eyes missing nothing. Easy to say now, she said finally, but a baby changes everything. Sleepless nights, endless crying, doctor appointments, school meetings. It's a lifetime commitment. I know that, Raymond said quietly. Do you? Because at my mama's age, this pregnancy comes with serious risks, and that's assuming everything goes perfectly with the baby, which is far from guaranteed. Lynette's voice caught slightly. Have either of you really thought this through? What it means? For both of you? The truth was, we hadn't. Not fully. How could we? Everything had happened so fast, and Raymond had only been back 1 day. We'd talked about doctor's appointments and morning sickness, but not about cribs and college funds and what would happen 20 years down the road when I'd be in my 80s and he'd be pushing 60. Not about the very real possibility that I might not be around to see this child grow up. We're figuring it out, I said, reaching for Raymond's hand. 1 day at a time. Lynette sighed, some of the fight going out of her. She pulled a brown paper bag from her purse and set it on the coffee table. The prenatal vitamins are in there. Take them with food or they'll make the nausea worse. The ginger drops help too. She stood, smoothing her scrubs. I've got to get to work, but I'll call tonight to check on you. I walked her to the door, leaving Raymond in the living room. On the porch, Lynette turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Mama, are you sure about this? About him? I looked back toward the living room, where Raymond sat waiting patiently, his elbows on his knees, staring at his clasped hands like they held the answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. I'm sure that right now I need him, I said honestly. The rest, we'll see. Lynette nodded, squeezing my hand. I'll call Dr. Harris, let her know you'll be bringing a friend. After she left, I returned to find Raymond still sitting in the same position, deep in thought. He looked up when I entered, his face troubled. "Your daughter's right," he said. "We haven't really thought this through. What it means, for you especially." I eased myself down beside him, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years. "No, we haven't. Because how could we? This isn't exactly a situation covered in any parenting book I've ever read." That made him smile, just a little. "No, I suppose not." "Raymond," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Not what you think I want to hear, but the absolute truth." I took a deep breath. "Are you really ready for this? A baby at 39, with a woman who's closer to 70 than 60? A woman who might not be around to see this child graduate high school, let alone college? Because if you're not, now's the time to say so." Before we get any deeper into this, Raymond was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on our joined hands. I could almost see the thoughts racing through his mind, the calculations, the fears. "I've spent most of my life on the move," he finally said. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never letting myself get attached to anyone or anything that couldn't fit in the back of my truck." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "It wasn't always like that. Had a steady girl once, back in my 20s. Lily. Thought we might get married, have a family, but she got tired of waiting for me to grow up, settle down. Can't blame her, really." He rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, a gesture that had already become familiar. "After Lily, I just drifted. Fishing season to fishing season, town to town. It was easier that way, safer." His eyes held mine, clear and honest. "Until you, Martha Lee. Until I knocked on your door selling fish and found myself making excuses to come back. Until I realized I was planning my whole route around when I could see you again." My heart swelled at his words, but I forced myself to stay focused. "That's about me, Raymond. This is about a baby, our baby." He nodded. "I know. And the truth is, I can't promise I'll be perfect at it. Can't promise I won't mess up sometimes. But I can promise I'll be there. Every day, every night, every doctor's appointment and midnight feeding and first step and skinned knee." His voice grew firmer with each word. "I'm done drifting, Martha. I want roots. I want a family. Our family." Relief and love and a dozen other emotions crashed over me all at once. I leaned into him, letting his arms come around me, holding me close. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" I whispered against his chest. "Having a baby, starting a family, at our age." I felt his laugh rumble through him. "Seems like it. God help us both. For the first time since that doctor's appointment, I let myself really believe it might work out, that this impossible situation might become something beautiful, that Raymond and I might actually have a future together, unexpected and unconventional as it might be. We spent the rest of the day making plans, real, practical plans. Raymond would need to find local work, something more stable than traveling fish sales. We'd need to set up a nursery. The spare room that used to be Sarah's would work, once we cleared out all the holiday decorations and old photo albums. We'd need to tell my other children, my grandchildren, face the town gossip that would surely follow. "I can fix up my sister's old place," Raymond suggested as we sat at the kitchen table making lists. "It's just outside Bayou Labat, been sitting empty since she moved in with her daughter. Needs work, but it's right on the water. Good fishing, close enough to visit here regular, but far enough from town that we'd have some privacy." The idea of leaving Whisper Creek, the only home I'd known for over 40 years, sent a pang through my chest. But so did the thought of raising a child under the judgmental eyes of neighbors who'd known me only as Harold's widow, as a grandmother, as a respectable church lady. "We don't have to decide everything today," Raymond said, seeing my hesitation. "Like you told Lynette, one day at a time." One day at a time. It became our mantra as we navigated the next 48 hours. Thursday morning brought more nausea, but also the first curious looks from Mabel next door when she spotted Raymond's truck still parked in my driveway. Thursday afternoon, we drove to the Piggly Wiggly 2 towns over, rather than the local grocery, avoiding the curious eyes of Whisper Creek. Thursday night, as we lay in bed, Raymond's hand resting protective on my still flat stomach, we talked about names, about hopes, about fears. And Friday morning, as we prepared to drive to Tuscaloosa to meet Dr. Harris, reality finally hit me full force. This was happening. I was 62 years old, pregnant, about to face a high-risk obstetrics specialist with a man 23 years my junior at my side. A man who, for all his promises, I'd known for less than 3 months. "Ready?" Raymond asked, keys in hand, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. I took a deep breath, smoothing my dress over my stomach. As I'll ever be. Dr. Harris's waiting room was like something from another planet compared to old Dr. Mitchell's clinic in Whisper Creek. Modern art on the walls, those fancy coffee machines that make 1 cup at a time, and a TV playing some home renovation show with the sound off. But the biggest difference was the other patients. Young women, most of them, with rounded bellies and glowing skin, flipping through parenting magazines or typing on their phones. When Raymond and I walked in, the receptionist smiled professionally. "Name and appointment time?" "Martha Lee Jenkins," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. 10:30. Her eyes flickered to her computer screen, then back to me, a small crease appearing between her brows. "And you're the patient?" I nodded, feeling heat creep up my neck. Beside me, Raymond squeezed my hand. "I'll need your ID and insurance card," she said, her professional smile now firmly fixed in place. As we settled into chairs in the corner, I could feel eyes on us. Not everyone. Most folks were too caught up in their own concerns to pay much attention, but enough. A young couple directly across from us kept glancing our way, whispering. The girl couldn't have been more than 25, her belly just starting to show under her stretchy top. "They're trying to figure out if I'm your son or your boyfriend," Raymond murmured close to my ear, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Stop," I whispered back, nudging him with my elbow, but I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. His ability to find humor in uncomfortable situations was one of the things I'd come to appreciate about him. Lynette was waiting for us in the exam room, already dressed in her scrubs from her morning shift at the hospital. She'd arranged her schedule to be there, a gesture that meant more than I could say, especially given her obvious reservations about the whole situation. "Mama," she said, hugging me tight, "how are you feeling today?" "Nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," I admitted. She smiled at that, the same smile she'd had since she was a little girl, slightly crooked with a dimple in her right cheek, just like her daddy's. "That's normal." Her eyes shifted to Raymond, standing awkwardly by the door. "For both of you, I imagine." He nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Yes, ma'am." It was progress, I thought. Not warmth exactly, but at least civil acknowledgement. I'd take it. Dr. Harris turned out to be younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sleek dark hair pulled back and reading glasses perched on her nose. She studied my chart for what felt like forever before looking up. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said, her voice neither judgmental nor particularly warm, just professional. "I have to say, this is a unique case for our practice." "I imagine it is," I said, smoothing my paper gown over my knees. "You understand that at 62, you're facing significant risks, for yourself and for the fetus." She glanced at Raymond, then at Lynette, who stood with her arms crossed, every inch the protective daughter and medical professional. "I'd like to be clear about those risks before we proceed with any examinations." What followed was the most terrifying 15 minutes of my life. Preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, chromosomal abnormalities, placental issues, premature birth. Each possibility laid out in calm clinical terms, each one hammering home the reality of what we were facing. By the time Dr. Harris finished her list of potential complications, My hands were trembling in my lap. Given these risks, she concluded, many women in your situation would consider termination. It's a perfectly valid option, and one I'm obligated to present to you. The word hung in the air between us. Termination. So clinical, so final. I felt Raymond stiffen beside me, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on my face. I understand the risks, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. But I'd like to continue with the pregnancy, if that's possible. Dr. Harris nodded, no judgment in her expression. Then we'll need to monitor you very closely. Weekly appointments, more frequent ultrasounds and blood work than a standard pregnancy. And you'll need to follow a strict regimen, diet, rest, exercise. Whatever it takes, I said. The examination itself was uncomfortable in every way, physically, emotionally, and with an audience of both Raymond and Lynette, mortifying too. But all of that faded away when Dr. Harris turned the ultrasound monitor toward us. There, she said, pointing to a tiny fluttering spot on the grainy screen. That's your baby's heartbeat. A sound filled the room then, fast, rhythmic, like a tiny drum. Something shifted inside me, a certainty settling deep in my bones. This wasn't just a medical situation anymore, not just a list of risks and complications. This was a baby. My baby. Our baby. I glanced at Raymond. His eyes were fixed on the screen, wonder and fear mingling on his face. When he felt my gaze, he looked down at me, a smile breaking through like sunshine after rain. That's our baby, he whispered, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the risks, not the judgment, not the uncertainty of our future. Just that tiny heartbeat and the three of us together in that sterile exam room, becoming a family. The drive home from Tuscaloosa was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Lynette had gone back to work, promising to call that evening. Raymond drove carefully, slower than usual, as if the precious cargo I carried might somehow be jostled by a bump in the road. "You okay over there?" he asked, after nearly 20 minutes of silence. "You're awful quiet." I turned from watching the familiar landscape roll by, farmland giving way to the small towns that dotted the highway between Tuscaloosa and Whisper Creek. Just thinking. "About what the doctor said? The risks?" I nodded. "Those, yes. But also, everything else. Telling my other children, the town finding out, where we'll live, how we'll manage." I sighed, suddenly overwhelmed by the mountain of decisions and challenges ahead. "Raymond, are we crazy? To even think we can do this?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. "Maybe," he said finally. "But I've been thinking about what Dr. Harris said about the odds, about all those risks and complications." "And?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "And I figure a woman who can get pregnant at 62 and a man who finds the love of his life selling fish door to door, we've already beaten some pretty long odds, don't you think?" The love of his life. The words sent a warmth spreading through me, pushing back against the fear. "I suppose we have it that." His hand found mine across the console. "We'll figure it out, Martha. All of it. Together." I wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to that moment of certainty we'd shared in the doctor's office when that tiny heartbeat filled the room. But as we approached the Whisper Creek town limits, reality began to seep back in. The "Welcome to Whisper Creek" sign, faded and peeling, seemed like a gateway back to a world where judgment waited around every corner. "We need to tell David and Sarah," I said, "before they hear it from someone else." Raymond nodded. "When?" "Soon. Today, if we can get them on the phone." I glanced at the dashboard clock. David should be home from work by now. My son David lived in Mobile with his wife Karen and their 3 kids. He was the practical one of my children, an accountant who planned everything down to the penny and rarely made a decision without a pro-con list. Sarah, my youngest, was the opposite, impulsive, creative, always chasing the next adventure. She'd moved to Arizona 5 years ago to open an art gallery with her partner, Jules. Telling them about the baby, about Raymond, wouldn't be easy, but the longer we waited, the harder it would get. As if reading my thoughts, Raymond said, "We could drive down to Mobile tomorrow, tell David in person. Might be better that way." The thought of facing my son with this news made my stomach clench, but Raymond was right. Some conversations needed to happen face to face. "All right," I agreed. "Mobile tomorrow, and we'll try to video call Sarah tonight." We pulled into my driveway just after 1 o'clock, both of us exhausted despite the early hour. But any hopes of a quiet afternoon to process everything we'd learned at the doctor's office vanished when I saw the cars parked along my street. Mabel's Lincoln, Elaine Peterson's station wagon, Judith Miller's little blue Honda, and right in front of my house, Pastor Dave's sensible Buick. "Oh, Lord," I breathed. The prayer circle. I forgot it was my turn to host. Every other Friday, a group from First Baptist gathered to pray for the sick, the troubled, and the needy in our community. For 20 years, we'd rotated houses, sharing coffee and cookies, and lifting up the concerns of our little town. And today, apparently, they'd let themselves in when I didn't answer the door. "I can come back later," Raymond offered, already putting the car in reverse. "No," I said, reaching for his hand. "No more hiding. If we're doing this, really doing this, then we face it head on, starting now." The look he gave me was full of pride and something deeper, something that made my heart flutter despite my 62 years. "Whatever you want, Martha Lee, I'm right beside you." And with that, we walked up the path to my front door, hand in hand, ready to face the first of many judgments together. The conversation in my living room stopped dead the moment Raymond and I walked through the door. 5 pairs of eyes turned to us, expressions ranging from curiosity to shock to something that looked suspiciously like delight at the prospect of fresh gossip. My prayer circle friends, settled with their Bibles and coffee cups, stared at us like we'd just dropped from outer space. "Martha Lee!" Mabel recovered first, her voice unnaturally high. "We were getting worried about you. Elaine used the spare key you keep under the flower pot." "Sorry I'm late, ladies. And Pastor Dave," I added, nodding to our minister, whose bushy eyebrows had practically disappeared into his hairline. "I had a doctor's appointment in Tuscaloosa. This is Raymond Collins. Raymond, these are my friends from church." Raymond nodded politely. "Ma'am, ladies, Pastor." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Pastor Dave cleared his throat. "We were just about to start our prayer requests. Perhaps your friend would like to join us?" The emphasis he placed on friend wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I felt Raymond stiffen beside me, but was grateful when he simply nodded and followed me to the couch. The only empty space was a small love seat, forcing us to sit closer than might have been wise given the company, but there was nothing to be done about it. "As I was saying," Judith Miller continued, her eyes darting between Raymond and me like she was watching a particularly interesting tennis match. "My nephew's wife is having troubles with the pregnancy. Bed rest for the duration, poor thing. Only 36 years old and high risk already." The pointed comment hung in the air. I felt heat creep up my neck but kept my expression neutral. "We'll certainly keep her in our prayers, Judith." The meeting continued in this vein. Normal prayer requests interspersed with curious glances and the occasional comment that seemed designed to provoke a reaction from either Raymond or me. Through it all, Raymond remained a steady presence beside me, his hand occasionally finding mine when a particularly barbed comment landed. "Brother Dave," Elaine said sweetly, about 20 minutes in, "perhaps you could remind us of the church's position on alternative living arrangements. My niece in Birmingham is living with her boyfriend, and I just don't know what to say to her." I'd had enough. "Actually, Elaine," I said, standing up, "I think what your niece needs is love and understanding, not judgment." I looked around at the circle of surprised faces. "And while we're on the subject of judgment, I have something to tell all of you. Something that's going to get around town anyway, so you might as well hear it from me directly." Raymond stood beside me, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture of support. "Raymond and I are having a baby." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to dare make a sound. Then, like a dam breaking, everyone spoke at once. "But how can you possibly, at your age, what will people—" Pastor Dave's voice rose above the others. "Martha Lee, surely you understand the irregular nature of this situation. Not just the age factor, which is concerning enough, but the moral implications of—" "With all due respect, Pastor," Raymond cut in, his voice quiet but firm, "there's nothing immoral about two people who care for each other bringing a child into this world." "Young man," Pastor Dave said, drawing himself up to his full height, which still left him a good 4 inches shorter than Raymond, "I don't believe anyone was addressing you." "Maybe someone should be," Raymond replied evenly, "since I'm the father of this baby you're all so concerned about." I placed a hand on Raymond's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I think," I said carefully, "that the prayer meeting is over for today. I appreciate your concern, all of you, but Raymond and I have had a long day, and I need to rest." They left reluctantly, each murmuring something that might have been congratulations or condolences. It was hard to tell. Pastor Dave was the last to go, pausing at the door to fix me with a look of deep disappointment. "Martha Lee, I've known you for 20 years. I presided over Harold's funeral. I baptized your grandchildren. I would have expected better judgment from you, of all people." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Pastor. But this baby is a blessing, unexpected as it may be, and I won't apologize for that." He shook his head sadly. "I'll be praying for you." And with that, he was gone. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Raymond sat beside me, his arm coming around my shoulders. "Well," he said after a moment, "that went about as well as could be expected." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, surprising us both. Oh Lord, their faces! I thought Judith Miller was going to faint dead away right there on my good throw pillow. Raymond chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing somewhat. The pastor looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. "Poor man probably did," I said, wiping tears of laughter, or maybe just regular tears, from my eyes. "He's not a bad sort, really, just set in his ways." "Like most of this town, I'm guessing," Raymond said, sobering. I nodded, reality settling back around us like a heavy blanket. By supper time, everyone in Whisper Creek will know. By breakfast tomorrow, they'll have added their own embellishments to the story. Raymond was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "We could leave," he said finally. "Go to my sister's place on the Gulf. Start fresh where nobody knows us or cares about our business." The offer was tempting. So tempting. To escape the judgment, the whispers, the disapproving looks. To start our unusual little family somewhere new, somewhere without the weight of everyone's expectations. But Whisper Creek was my home, had been for most of my life. My children had grown up here. Harold was buried here. Could I really walk away from all of that? "Let's see how things play out," I said, not quite ready to commit either way. "We still need to tell David and Sarah, one battle at a time." Raymond nodded, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." We spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the conversations ahead. I called David first, just to make sure he'd be home the next day for our visit. He sounded surprised. I rarely drove down to Mobile without weeks of planning, but pleased. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. "You sound tired." "Just a lot going on," I said, not quite lying but not telling the whole truth either. "I'll explain everything tomorrow." Sarah was harder to reach. 3 time zones away and always busy with the gallery, she didn't answer her phone until nearly dinner time our time. "Mama!" Her voice, when she finally picked up, was bright and distracted. Sorry I missed your calls. We're setting up for a new exhibition, and it's chaos here. Can I call you back tomorrow? Actually, sweetheart, I need to talk to you now. It's important. I took a deep breath, Raymond's steady presence beside me giving me courage. I have some news. You're not sick, are you? Sarah's voice sharpened, the distraction gone. No, nothing like that, but it is medical in a way. I closed my eyes, finding it somehow easier to say the words without seeing Raymond's face. Sarah, I'm pregnant. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought we'd lost the connection. Sarah, are you there? I'm here, she said finally, her voice faint. I'm just processing. Did you say pregnant? As in, having a baby pregnant? Yes, but how is that even possible? He didn't just have one son, he had two, maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. Rare, but not impossible apparently, I said, attempting a light tone. I'm being monitored closely. The baby has a strong heartbeat. Another long pause, then, who's the father? This was the part I'd been dreading most. Sarah had been closest to her daddy, had taken his death the hardest. The thought of me with someone else, especially someone younger, would be particularly difficult for her to accept. His name is Raymond Collins. He's 39, from the Gulf Coast originally. A fisherman. 39, Sarah repeated flatly. He's practically my age, Mama. I know how it sounds. Do you? Do you really? Sarah's voice rose slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're having some kind of late-life crisis. First taking up with a man half your age, and now this? What are you thinking? The hurt in her voice cut deep. I'm thinking that life doesn't always go according to plan, I said quietly. I'm thinking that sometimes joy comes in unexpected packages. And I'm thinking that I'd really like my daughter's support right now, when I'm facing the most challenging and frightening time of my life. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I need some time with this, Mama, she said finally. It's a lot to take in. I understand, I said, though my heart ached at her distance. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I love you. That hasn't changed. Will never change. I know, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. I love you too. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? After I've had some time to process. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap, staring at nothing. Raymond's arm came around me, pulling me close. That could have gone worse, he offered. I nodded, but couldn't quite find words. The day had taken its toll, the doctor's appointment, the prayer circle ambush, now Sarah's reaction. It was all too much. Come on, Raymond said gently, helping me to my feet. You need to rest. Big day tomorrow with David. As he led me toward the bedroom, the phone rang again. I almost let it go to voicemail, too emotionally drained to handle another difficult conversation. But a glance at the caller ID made my heart sink. Lynette. She's probably just checking in after the appointment, Raymond suggested. I nodded, taking a deep breath before answering. Hello? Mama. Lynette's voice was tight, controlled. I just got off the phone with Mrs. Miller. She says you announced your pregnancy to the entire prayer circle? With him standing right there beside you? I closed my eyes, suddenly bone-weary. Yes, it seemed better than letting the rumors fly. You know how this town works. And what about us, your family? Did you think maybe we deserved to hear this news before the entire town did? Honey, I was going to tell everyone. We're driving down to see David tomorrow, and I just spoke to Sarah. After the fact, after the whole town knows. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I had 3 people stop me in the hospital cafeteria asking if it was true. My own mother, and I had to find out from Judith Miller's husband's cousin. The hurt in her voice made my chest ache. I'm sorry, Lynette. You're right. I should have thought about how this would affect you. It's just been so overwhelming, and after the doctor's appointment, we weren't thinking clearly." "We," she repeated, the word sharp with accusation. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Throwing away everything. Your reputation, your relationship with your family, maybe even your health, for this fling with a man you barely know." Raymond, who could clearly hear every word, stiffened beside me, but remained silent, letting me handle my daughter in my own way. "This isn't a fling," I said quietly but firmly. "And yes, I'm really doing this. Having this baby, building a life with Raymond, if that's where this leads. I pray that you'll find a way to accept that, because I need my family now more than ever. But with or without your approval, this is happening." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Lynette sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "I need some time, Mama," she said, echoing her sister's words from earlier. "This is all happening so fast, and I'm worried about you, medically, emotionally, everything." "I know you are, sweetheart, and I love you for it. Take all the time you need. I'll be here." After we hung up, I leaned into Raymond's solid presence, letting him support my weight. "That's 2 for 2, I murmured against his chest. "Give them time," he said, his hand making soothing circles on my back. "It's a shock, for everyone." I nodded, too tired to argue, too tired to worry about tomorrow's conversation with David, too tired to think about the whispers already circulating through Whisper Creek. "One day at a time," we'd said. But this day had already been about 10 days too long. The drive to Mobile the next day was quiet. I dozed on and off, pregnancy fatigue hitting me hard despite a full night's sleep. Raymond drove carefully, one hand often reaching across to rest on mine, a gesture that had already become familiar, comforting. The late September sun filtered through the trees along the highway, creating patterns of light and shadow across the dashboard. "You okay over there?" Raymond asked as we passed the Mobile City Limits sign. "You've been mighty quiet." I turned from watching the scenery roll by. Just thinking about what to say to David. He's the practical one, always has been. Ever since he was a little boy, everything had to make sense, had to follow some kind of logical pattern. I sighed, rubbing my temple where a headache threatened. And there's nothing logical about any of this. Raymond's hand squeezed mine. "We'll figure it out. Together." David and Karen lived in a neat subdivision on the outskirts of Mobile. Identical houses with identical lawns, differentiated only by the color of the shutters and the decorations on the front porches. Their house was the blue one with white shutters, a basketball hoop over the garage, and a colorful fall wreath on the front door. As Raymond pulled into the driveway, I felt my heart racing. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading since that day in Dr. Mitchell's office, telling my son, my responsible, logical, level-headed son, that his 62-year-old mother was pregnant by a man she'd known less than 3 months. "Ready?" Raymond asked, turning off the engine. I nodded, though ready was about the furthest thing from how I felt. As I'll ever be. David answered the door, his expression shifting from welcome to confusion as he registered Raymond standing behind me. "Mom? Everything okay?" His eyes darted between us, immediately sensing something was off. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, mustering a smile. "This is Raymond Collins. Raymond, this is my son, David." The men shook hands, sizing each other up in that way men do. David, at 42, was only 3 years older than Raymond, a fact that was clearly not lost on him as his brow furrowed slightly. "Nice to meet you," he said, his politeness winning out over his obvious confusion. "Come on in. Karen's just finishing up lunch." The house was exactly as I remembered from my last visit. Immaculately clean, tastefully decorated in shades of beige and blue, family photos arranged precisely on the walls. Karen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her pretty face lighting up at the sight of me. "Martha, What a lovely surprise. David said you were coming, but he didn't mention you were bringing a friend. I hugged my daughter-in-law, grateful for her warmth. Karen had always been easy to talk to, less judgmental than my own children in many ways. "This is Raymond," I said. "Raymond. This is Karen, David's wife." "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Raymond said. And I could see Karen registering his age, his manner, the way he stood close to me. Her eyes widened slightly, but her smile never faltered. "Well, lunch is almost ready. I hope you both like chicken salad." We gathered around the dining table, David, Karen, Raymond, and me, making awkward small talk about the drive down, the weather, Karen's new job teaching kindergarten. Through it all, I could feel David watching Raymond, questions building behind his eyes. Finally, as Karen served coffee after the meal, David set down his fork and fixed me with a direct look. "So, Mom, what brings you all the way down here? Your call sounded important." This was it, the moment I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. I took a deep breath, feeling Raymond's steady presence beside me. "David, Karen, I have some news. News that's going to come as a shock, I'm sure." David's expression grew concerned. "Are you sick? Is that why you were at the doctor in Tuscaloosa?" "No, not sick. But yes, that's why I was at the doctor." I reached for Raymond's hand under the table, drawing strength from his touch. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. David stared at me, then at Raymond, then back at me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something close to anger. "That's not possible," he finally said, his voice flat. "You're 62 years old." "Rare, but not impossible, according to Dr. Harris," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm being closely monitored. The baby has a strong heartbeat." "And you're—" David's eyes flicked to Raymond, hardening. "I assume you're—" "The father, yes," Raymond confirmed, meeting David's gaze directly, "and fully committed to Martha and our child." David's laugh was harsh, without humor. "Committed. Right. And how long have you two known each other exactly?" "About 3 months," I admitted. 3 months. David shook his head in disbelief. "Mom, have you lost your mind? You barely know this man, and you're having a baby with him? At your age? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" "We've seen the doctors," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the hurt his words caused. "We understand the risks." "The risks?" David pushed back from the table, standing up to pace the dining room. "The risks of a geriatric pregnancy? The risks of raising a child when you'll be in your 80s by the time they graduate high school? The risks of trusting a complete stranger with your health, your future, your finances." "David," Karen said quietly, a warning in her tone. "Let's all take a breath here." But David was too wound up to stop. "No, this is insane. Absolutely insane. Mom, you're always the sensible one, the responsible one. What happened? Is this some kind of, I don't know, delayed grief reaction? Some kind of midlife crisis 20 years too late?" "That's enough," Raymond said, his voice firm but controlled. "I understand you're concerned about your mother. That's natural, but she deserves your respect, not your judgment." David turned to Raymond, eyes flashing. "With all due respect, you don't get to tell me how to talk to my mother. You've known her for what, 12 weeks? I've known her my entire life." "And in your entire life," I cut in, finding my voice at last, "have I ever done anything to suggest I'm reckless or foolish or unable to make my own decisions?" That stopped him. David looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I dropped my bombshell news. "No," he admitted finally. "No, you haven't." "Then trust me now," I said, reaching for his hand across the table. "Trust that I know what I'm doing, that I've thought about all those things you mentioned, the risks, the future, all of it, and I've decided that this baby, unexpected as it may be, is a blessing I'm not willing to give up." David sank back into his chair, the fight going out of him. I'm just worried about you, Mom. It's a lot. For anyone, at any age, but especially for an old lady like me. I finished for him, a small smile softening the words. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. And it's okay. I squeezed his hand. I'm worried too. Terrified, if you want the truth. But also, happy. I glanced at Raymond, who was watching me with a tenderness that made my heart swell. Happier than I've been in a very long time. Karen, who had been silent through most of the exchange, reached across to touch my arm. How far along are you? About 10 weeks, I said, grateful for the shift in conversation. Due in early April, God willing. And the baby's healthy? Everything looks normal so far? I nodded. Strong heartbeat. Good size for this stage. Dr. Harris wants to do more tests, of course, given my age, but so far, so good. Karen smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Then congratulations are in order, I think. She stood, coming around the table to hug me. Then, after only a slight hesitation, Raymond as well. Welcome to the family, I suppose. David watched this exchange, his expression still troubled, but softening around the edges. You're really doing this? Having a baby at 62? Starting over with someone new? I am, I said simply. With or without your blessing, though I'd much rather have it. He was quiet for a long moment, studying Raymond with the critical eye of a protective son. What are your intentions toward my mother? He asked finally, the formal question almost comical in its old-fashioned directness. Raymond didn't laugh, though. He met David's gaze steadily. I love her, he said, the first time he'd spoken those words aloud. I want to build a life with her and our child. I want to take care of them both for as long as I'm breathing. A lump formed in my throat at his declaration, so simple and yet so profound. David seemed similarly affected, though he tried to hide it with a gruff clearing of his throat. Well, he said after a moment, I guess that's all anyone can ask for. He turned to me, his expression softening further. It's going to take some getting used to, Mom, for all of us. But if this is what you want, if he's what you want, then I'll try my best to support you. Relief washed over me like a wave, bringing tears to my eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. The rest of the visit passed more comfortably. Karen insisted on showing Raymond the family photos on the wall, telling him stories about the grandchildren who were at school and would be disappointed to have missed my visit. David pulled me aside while they were occupied, his voice low and serious. Are you sure about this, Mom? Really sure? Because if you have any doubts, any at all. I patted his cheek. This grown man who would always be my little boy in some corner of my heart. I'm sure about the baby, I said honestly. As for the rest, we're figuring it out day by day, just like everybody else does. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Okay, but promise me one thing? What's that? If you need anything at all, you'll call. Money, help around the house, someone to go to doctor's appointments with you if Raymond isn't around. Promise me. The unspoken doubt in his last words stung a little, but I understood it came from love, from concern. I promise, I said, hugging him tight. But he'll be around, David. He's not going anywhere. As Raymond and I drove back to Whisper Creek that evening, the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt lighter somehow. One hurdle cleared. One child, if not fully on board, at least not actively opposed. It was progress. That went better than I expected, Raymond said, echoing my thoughts. Your son's protective of you. That's a good thing. He'll come around, I said, watching the familiar landmarks slip by as we neared home. They all will eventually. They just need time. Raymond nodded, reaching for my hand. Time we've got. 9 months of it at least. I smiled, leaning back against the headrest. 7 more, actually. And from what I remember of being pregnant with my first 3, Those months fly by faster than you'd think. October in Whisper Creek brought changing leaves, cooler mornings, and the annual Fall Festival at First Baptist Church. In normal years, I'd be right in the middle of it all, organizing the pie contest, setting up the quilt display, making sure Pastor Dave had enough volunteers for the dunking booth. This year, though, my phone remained silent. No committee calls, no planning meetings, just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the occasional ring when Lynette or David checked in. Word had spread through town like wildfire after that prayer circle meeting. Martha Lee Jenkins, pregnant at 62 with a younger man's baby. The scandal of it. The shame. I'd stopped going to church after the third Sunday of sitting alone in my usual pew, the empty spaces around me speaking louder than any sermon Pastor Dave could deliver. The grocery store became an exercise in endurance, the whispers that followed me down the aisles, the conversations that stopped when I rounded a corner, the cashier who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I started driving to the Walmart in Tuscaloosa instead, where I was just another customer, anonymous and unremarkable. Raymond noticed, of course, the isolation. The phone calls from old friends that never came. The invitations that dried up like summer puddles. He'd set his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes, but I'd shake my head. "It's not worth the fight," I'd tell him. "They'll either come around or they won't." But it hurt. Lord, how it hurt. These were people I'd known for decades, people who'd brought casseroles when Harold died, who'd celebrated my children's weddings and my grandchildren's births, people who now looked at me like I'd grown a second head, or worse, like I'd deliberately betrayed everything our little community stood for. Raymond had found work at a boat repair shop in Bayou La Batre, about an hour's drive from Whisper Creek. He'd leave early in the morning and return late afternoon, smelling of engine oil and sea salt. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and they didn't mind when he needed time off for my doctor's appointments. Those appointments had become the rhythm of our weeks. Every Wednesday, the drive to Tuscaloosa, the same waiting room with the same curious looks, though fewer now that the receptionists had grown used to us. Doctor Harris checking my blood pressure, measuring my growing belly, listening to the baby's heartbeat, strong and steady, a sound that never failed to bring tears to my eyes, no matter how many times I heard it. "Everything looks good," she'd say, a hint of surprise in her voice each time, as if she'd been expecting disaster and was pleasantly disappointed. "Keep doing what you're doing. Rest when you need to. Eat well. Take your vitamins." Simple instructions that belied the complexity of what was happening. My body, long past what should have been its childbearing years, nurturing new life against all odds. My heart, widow-worn and cautious, opening to love again in a way I'd never expected. My life, once settled into comfortable predictability, now completely upended and reformed around this child, this man, this second chance I'd never asked for but couldn't imagine refusing. It was a Saturday in late October when I felt the first flutter, like butterfly wings deep inside, so faint I might have imagined it. I was in the garden, pulling the last of the summer tomatoes from vines gone woody and brown. Raymond was on the porch, fixing the loose railing that had been wobbling for years. I straightened, one hand going to my slightly rounded belly, a smile spreading across my face. "Raymond," I called, my voice catching. "Raymond, come quick." He was at my side in an instant, worry etched on his face. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I felt the baby move," I said, tears springing to my eyes. "Just a little flutter, but it was real. It was there." The wonder that spread across his face was something I'll never forget. He knelt in the dirt beside me, his calloused hand covering mine on my stomach. "Really? What's it feel like?" Like a fish swimming. Just the lightest touch, here and gone. I laughed, the joy of it bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "Oh, Raymond, there's really a baby in there, our baby." He looked up at me, those sad, happy eyes shining with tears of his own. "Our baby," he repeated, the words reverent as any prayer. We stayed like that, kneeling in the October dirt among the fading tomato plants, his hand warm on mine, waiting for another flutter that didn't come, but content in the knowledge that it would, eventually. That our child was growing, thriving, making its presence known in my aging body. The moment was broken by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, an unfamiliar SUV with Arizona plates. I straightened, shading my eyes against the late afternoon sun. Who in the world? The driver's door opened, and a slender woman with short dark hair emerged, sunglasses pushed up on her head. My heart leapt to my throat. Sarah? My youngest daughter stood uncertainly by her rental car, looking both familiar and strange, the same heart-shaped face and determined chin, but with new lines around her eyes, a new wariness in her posture. Hi, Mama. I crossed the yard as quickly as my condition allowed, Raymond a step behind me. What are you doing here? Why didn't you call? Is everything okay? Sarah's eyes flickered to Raymond, then to my slightly rounded belly, visible now under my gardening shirt. Something passed across her face. Surprise, perhaps, at the physical evidence of what had been only abstract before. I wanted to see you, she said simply. Face to face. Some things shouldn't happen over the phone. There was an edge to her voice that made me wary. Of course, sweetheart. Come inside. You must be exhausted after the drive from the airport. In the kitchen, the awkwardness was palpable. Sarah perched on the edge of a chair, declining offers of tea, coffee, something to eat. Raymond sensed the tension and made himself scarce, muttering something about finishing the porch railing before dark. It was just the two of us, mother and daughter, with a gulf between us wider than the physical distance that had separated us these past 5 years. You look good, Mama, Sarah finally said, her eyes taking in my appearance. Tired, maybe, but good. Pregnancy agrees with me, I said, attempting a smile. Even at this age, who would have thought? She nodded, fingering the edge of the placemat in front of her. Lynette told me you'd stopped going to church, that people in town were being difficult. I sighed, settling into the chair across from her. Small towns have long memories and loud whispers. It'll pass, eventually. Will it? Sarah's eyes met mine, challenging. Or will you always be the crazy old lady who got herself pregnant by the traveling fisherman? The words stung, sharper for coming from my own daughter. Is that what you think too? Sarah looked away, her jaw working. I don't know what to think, Mama. I get a call out of the blue that my 62-year-old mother is pregnant by a man half her age, a man none of us have ever met, a man who just happened to be passing through town selling fish. What am I supposed to think? You could try thinking that your mother knows her own mind, I said quietly. That maybe, just maybe, this isn't some kind of crisis or mistake or cry for help, but a chance at happiness I never expected to find again. At what cost? Sarah demanded, leaning forward. Your health, your reputation, your relationships with your family and friends? My reputation? I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Since when have you cared about what people think, Sarah Elizabeth? You, who moved across the country with another woman when half this town still couldn't wrap their heads around what that even meant. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That was different. Was it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the same thing. Choosing love over convention. Following your heart instead of other people's rules. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the placemat she was still worrying between her fingers. I'm just worried about you, Mama, she finally said, her voice softer. This pregnancy, it's dangerous at your age. And what happens after? Raising a child in your 60s, your 70s, and what if... She swallowed hard. What if he leaves? What then? The fear behind her anger was suddenly so clear, so familiar. The same fear I'd seen in Lynette's eyes, heard in David's voice. The fear of loss, of change, of a future that suddenly looked nothing like what any of us had imagined. Come here, I said, patting the chair next to mine. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah moved around the table, sitting close enough that I could take her hands in mine. I'm scared too, sweetheart. Terrified, if you want the truth. But I've learned something these past few months. I squeezed her hands gently. Fear isn't always a warning. Sometimes it's just the price of admission for something wonderful. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't lose you, Mama. Oh, baby. I pulled her close. This grown woman who would always be my little girl with the skinned knees and fierce heart. You're not going to lose me. Not yet. Not for a good long while if I have anything to say about it. She clung to me, her tears dampening my shoulder. Promise? I promise to do everything the doctors tell me, to take care of myself and this baby the best way I know how. I pulled back to look her in the eye. But I can't promise nothing will go wrong. Nobody can promise that at any age. She nodded, wiping her eyes. And him? Raymond? Is he? Do you really? Love him, I finished for her. Yes, it surprised me as much as anyone. But yes, I do. And he loves you? Not just the idea of you, or some kind of mother figure, or... Sarah, I cut her off gently. He loves me, the real me, wrinkles and gray hair and strong opinions and all. And if you'd give him half a chance, I think you might see why. She took a shaky breath. Okay, I'll try. That's all I can promise right now, but I'll try. It was enough. A start, at least. I hugged her again, feeling the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. Now, I said, pulling back with a smile. Tell me how long you're staying, and if Jules is joining you, and what in the world made you drive all the way from Mobile in a rental car instead of letting me pick you up at the airport like a normal person. Sarah laughed, a watery sound, but genuine. Well, actually, I'm here for 2 weeks. The gallery's closed for renovations, and Jules is coming next weekend. And I didn't tell you I was coming because... She hesitated. Because I was afraid I might lose my nerve. That I'd get to the airport and turn around and go back to Arizona without facing any of this. I'm glad you didn't, I said softly. So glad. Later that evening, the three of us sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah and Raymond making cautious conversation, finding common ground in a shared love of the Gulf Coast, of art. His mother had been a painter, it turned out, something I hadn't known until now. I sat between them in the porch swing, one hand resting on my growing belly, feeling another flutter from the life within. A perfect moment in an imperfect situation, fragile as a soap bubble, but no less beautiful for it. 3 down, I thought to myself. 3 children, if not fully reconciled to this new reality, at least willing to try. It was more than I dared hope for just weeks ago. As darkness fell, I leaned my head against Raymond's shoulder, allowing myself to believe, just for this moment, that everything might work out after all. The months that followed seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, and yet stretch out like molasses in January, all at the same time. My body changed in ways I barely remembered from my first 3 pregnancies. The growing roundness, the aches in places I didn't know could ache, the strange cravings that sent Raymond to the 24-hour Walmart at midnight for chocolate ice cream and dill pickles. Some things were different this time, though. The fatigue ran deeper. The worry was sharper. The joy, somehow, more intense. By Christmas, I couldn't hide my condition anymore. Not that I was trying to. My belly led the way wherever I went, a proud announcement of the miracle growing within. Raymond had moved in permanently, his few possessions fitting easily into the spaces Harold had left behind. We settled into a rhythm together, his early mornings at the boat shop, my slower starts to the day, our evenings on the porch when weather permitted, or by the fireplace when the winter chill set in. Whisper Creek gradually adjusted to our situation, as small towns do when the initial shock wears off. Some folks came around completely. Mabel next door was the first, bringing over a casserole one evening and asking shyly if she could feel the baby kick. Others maintained a polite distance, civil when our paths crossed, but never quite warming up. Pastor Dave remained coolly formal, though he did stop by once to check on me after a particularly bad ice storm knocked out power across town. My children surprised me the most. David and Karen drove up from Mobile every other weekend, bringing their kids, who were simultaneously horrified and fascinated by the idea of a new aunt or uncle younger than themselves. Sarah extended her visit through Thanksgiving, then came back for Christmas with Jules, both of them bringing baby gifts from Arizona, handmade blankets and tiny clothes from local artisans. And Lynette, my practical, worried Lynette, became my fiercest advocate. She accompanied me to every doctor's appointment, peppering Dr. Harris with questions, researching the latest studies on geriatric pregnancies, organizing a small baby shower with the few friends who hadn't abandoned me. Watching her with Raymond was like witnessing a slow thaw, suspicion giving way to grudging respect, then careful friendship, especially after he spent 3 days fixing the leaky roof on her garage that no contractor would touch. January brought the coldest snap Whisper Creek had seen in decades, pipes freezing all over town, roads slick with black ice. Raymond insisted on moving our bedroom downstairs, worried about me navigating the stairs with my growing belly, throwing off my balance. He set up a cozy nest in the old study, bringing down our bed, hanging curtains, even painting the walls a soft yellow that seemed to capture and hold what little sunlight filtered through the winter clouds. February was all doctor's appointments and hospital tours, birth plans and contingency plans. Advanced maternal age, Dr. Harris kept saying, a clinical term that didn't begin to capture the reality of preparing to bring life into the world when most women my age were welcoming great-grandchildren. The risks were real: preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, placental issues. But so far, miraculously, I dodged them all. The baby was growing perfectly, right on schedule, strong heartbeat, all parts where they should be. It's a girl, Dr. Harris told us during the 20-week ultrasound, and I wept while Raymond held my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. A daughter. A little girl who'd have her father's eyes, maybe, or his gentle heart. A sister to my grown children, an aunt to my grandchildren, a miracle no matter how you looked at it. We named her Hope. It seemed right, somehow, this child who'd appeared in our lives when neither of us was looking, who'd brought us together across years and miles and every odd imaginable. Hope for new beginnings, hope for second chances, hope for joy that comes when you least expect it. March roared in like the proverbial lion, bringing storms that rattled the windows and flooded the creek that gave our town its name. I was enormous by then, waddling more than walking, sleeping in snatches between bathroom trips and the baby's gymnastics routines that seemed to peak just as I was drifting off. Raymond took leave from the boat shop, unwilling to be an hour away when the time came. He painted the nursery, the small room off the dining room that had once been Harold's home office, a soft green, hung curtains printed with tiny yellow ducks, assembled the crib his sister had shipped from her daughter's outgrown baby things. It was during one of those March storms, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the sky, that I felt the first real contraction. Not the practice ones I'd been having for weeks, but a deep, gripping sensation that took my breath away. I was in the kitchen, washing breakfast dishes when it hit. The plate I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile floor. "Raymond," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. "I think it's time." What followed was both ordinary and extraordinary. The drive to Tuscaloosa through the rain, Raymond white-knuckled at the wheel but never speeding, never putting us at risk. The hospital admission, nurses bustling around with practiced efficiency, Lynette appearing as if by magic in her scrubs, having been called by Dr. Harris. The labor itself, both familiar and new, my 62-year-old body remembering a dance it hadn't performed in over 40 years. "You're doing great, Martha," Dr. Harris kept saying, a note of wonder in her voice that matched my own. Baby's handling everything beautifully. Hours passed, marked by contractions and breathing and Raymond's steady presence. My children arrived one by one, David first, then Sarah, then their spouses, gathering in the waiting room like sentinels. Through it all, I felt carried by something larger than myself, larger than all of us. A current of grace, maybe, or the simple miracle of life's persistence against all odds. Hope Elizabeth Collins made her entrance at 3:17 in the morning on March 12th, screaming her displeasure at the bright lights and cold air, all 6 pounds, 4 ounces of her perfect in every way. They placed her on my chest, this tiny miracle with a shock of dark hair and her father's chin, and everything else fell away. The pain, the worry, the judgment, the fear. There was only this moment, this child, this overwhelming love that filled every corner of my tired heart. Raymond wept as he cut the cord, his hands steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "She's beautiful," he whispered, touching her tiny fingers with a gentleness that made my own eyes fill. Perfect, just perfect. My children filed in later, after the initial checks and cleanup, their faces a mix of awe and lingering disbelief. Lynette, the nurse, examined Hope with professional eyes before allowing herself to melt into the role of big sister. David counted fingers and toes with the precision of an accountant, then looked up with a smile that erased the last of my worries about his acceptance. And Sarah, my free spirit, simply gathered both Raymond and me into a fierce hug, whispering, "She's amazing. You're both amazing." The days that followed were a blur of feedings and diaper changes, visitors bearing gifts and casseroles, sleepless nights, and joy so sharp it felt like pain sometimes. Raymond never left my side, handling everything from laundry to midnight feedings with a competence that surprised us both. My children took shifts helping, even David extending his stay in Whisper Creek, working remotely from my dining room table so he could be there for Hope's first weeks. And the town, our little community that had whispered and judged and pulled away, began to come back, drawn by the irresistible magic of new life. Pastor Dave was among the first, arriving with a small white Bible and an awkward but sincere blessing for Hope. The prayer circle ladies followed, bearing gifts and apologies wrapped in casserole dishes and handmade blankets. Even old Mrs. Granger from across the street, who hadn't spoken to me since the news broke, appeared one morning with a hand-knit sweater and tears in her eyes. "She's a miracle," people kept saying, as if I needed reminding, as if I didn't feel it with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of this unexpected new chapter of my life. I survived the lie, and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. Now, 6 months later, sitting on my porch swing with Hope sleeping against my chest and Raymond working in the garden nearby, I find myself reflecting on the journey that brought us here. The whispers haven't completely stopped. They never will in a town this size, but they've softened, become less important in the face of the everyday miracle of watching my daughter grow. We decided to stay in Whisper Creek in the end. Raymond fixed up his sister's place on the Gulf as a weekend getaway, a place to take Hope swimming when she's older, to teach her about tides and fish and the smell of salt air. But this house, with its memories both old and new, is home. Our home, improbable as that once seemed. My body recovered slower than it did 40 years ago, of course. There are days when my joints ache and my energy flags, when I wonder how I'll keep up with a toddler at 65, a teenager at 75. But those worries fade when Hope smiles, when she reaches for me with complete trust, when I see Raymond watching us both with that look of wonder that hasn't diminished since the day she was born. Love doesn't follow rules or timelines. It doesn't check birth certificates or calendars before blooming. It simply arrives, sometimes when you least expect it, and asks only that you be brave enough to accept it. At 62, I found the courage to say yes, to Raymond, to Hope, to a future I never imagined but now can't imagine living without. So if you're wondering if it's too late for joy, for surprise, for love in all its forms, it's not. Take it from this old Southern lady with a new baby and a younger man and a heart fuller than it's ever been. It's never too late for a miracle. You just have to be ready to recognize it when it knocks on your door, maybe selling fish, maybe offering something else entirely. You just have to be brave enough to invite it in.